Practical Anarchy, a guide to self-determination. Dickie Dredd. Religion, war and violence. From the earliest crusades to modern wars on terror, religion has repeatedly served as a banner under which political and economic power plays were waged. The Crusades, for instance, were framed as holy missions to reclaim Jerusalem, yet they were equally about land, plunder and the consolidation of papal power. Similarly, Islamic jihads historically functioned both as spiritual struggles and as political expansions of empire. In Europe, just war theories gave theological legitimacy to centuries of conflict, allowing monarchs and popes to mask material ambitions beneath divine sanction. The pattern continues into modernity. In Iraq and Afghanistan, interventions were couched in the language of defending civilization against religious extremism. But in practice, they reflected imperial geopolitics and the interests of global oil and defence industries. Religious justification still played its part. The rhetoric of a crusade slipped into speeches, and Islamic militancy was often framed as irrational evil rather than as a reaction to decades of occupation and exploitation. Case study: the Iraq War as a crusade. When George Bush described the war on terror as a crusade in 2001, the word echoed centuries of Christian-Muslim conflict. Though the White House later backtracked, the slip revealed how deeply religious imagery permeates political discourse. The Iraq War, launched in 2003 on false pretenses of weapons of mass destruction, was justified as a mission to liberate and civilise. In reality, it left hundreds of thousands dead, destabilised an entire region, and generated enormous profits for defence contractors such as Halliburton. Religion here served less as a cause than as a cloak, providing a moral veneer for imperial violence. The Israel-Palestine conflict offers a stark contemporary example. Both religious and nationalist narratives fuel the violence. Israeli leaders frequently evoke biblical claims to land, whilst Palestinian factions draw on Islamic concepts of resistance and martyrdom. Yet beneath those invocations lie material struggles over territory, water, sovereignty and survival. Recent escalations, from the 2023 Gaza bombardments to ongoing settler expansion in the West Bank, demonstrate how religious symbols continue to legitimise what are, at root, battles for political dominance and resources. The human toll is immense: thousands killed, millions displaced, communities fractured along lines that are presented as divine but are in fact profoundly political. Case study: settler colonisation in the West Bank. Settler expansion in the West Bank illustrates how religious rhetoric masks colonial realities. Many settlers cite the Bible's promise of Judea and Samaria to justify seizure of Palestinian land. With state backing, settlements expand, olive groves are destroyed and checkpoints multiply, all under the claim of divine mandate. Palestinians resist under the banner of Islam and national liberation, but the asymmetry of power is clear. One of the world's most advanced militaries confronting a dispossessed population. Religious frames obscure what anarchists identify as the true drivers: territorial control, economic dominance and state survival. Religion and the nuclear age. Religious rhetoric has also been used to sanctify the most destructive weapons ever created. During the Cold War, both American and Soviet leaders evoked divine sanction for their nuclear arsenals. In the US, presidents regularly described the nation as chosen by God to defend freedom, while clergy blessed missile silos and warheads. Evangelical groups promoted apocalyptic readings of scripture that framed nuclear confrontation as part of God's plan. On the Soviet side, orthodoxy was strategically revived in later years to reinforce patriotism and justify military power. The effect was the same. Religion cloaked existential threats in a mantle of inevitability, narrowing the space for dissent. That legacy continues today, as nuclear powers evoke divine or civilizational missions to justify maintaining arsenals capable of annihilating humanity. As explored earlier when we talked about terrorism, holy wars often serve as distraction tactics. While publics are taught to fear religious extremism, arms industries and states profit handsomely from perpetual war. The military-industrial complex requires enemies, and the religion provides ready-made categories of us and them. BAE Systems' record-breaking arms deals with Saudi Arabia, for example, were justified under the guise of regional security, even as those weapons were turned on civilians in Yemen. For anarchists, the lesson is consistent with earlier discussions of money and the state. Religion functions less as a transcendent truth than a tool for legitimising violence, hierarchy and profit. Whether under the cross, the crescent or the flag of freedom, wars waged in the name of God ultimately consolidate earthly powers. This analysis also sets the stage for later chapters, where we examine nationalism and militarism more directly, showing how the logics of war and the state intertwine and how anarchism seeks to disrupt both. Section 52. The dire situation in the United States. The US today offers one of the starkest examples of how religion, capitalism and authoritarian politics fuse together. Evangelical Christianity has become a powerful political force, shaping laws on abortion, education and LGBT plus rights. Supreme Court's overturning of Roe v. Wade in 2022 was celebrated by many evangelical groups as a divine victory, even though it stripped millions of women of reproductive freedom and further entrenched inequality. Trumpism, too, has leaned heavily on biblical rhetoric, from pastors comparing him to King Cyrus as a divinely appointed leader, to megachurch rallies that fuse nationalism with prophecy. This is not religion as private faith, but religion as a tool of state and corporate power. The prosperity gospel is another piece of this puzzle. Televangelists who preach that wealth is a sign of God's blessing and poverty a mark of moral failure. Figures like Joel Osteen, discussed earlier, have built personal empires worth tens of millions of dollars, while their congregations are urged to give more in the hope of divine return. This theology neatly dovetails with neoliberal capitalism, sanctifying inequality, blaming the poor for their condition, and masking exploitation with the promises of heavenly reward. The wider culture war follows suit. Battles over wokeness, school curricula, trans rights and public monuments are framed in biblical language, mobilising evangelical voters while distracting from systemic problems of wage slavery, healthcare inequality and corporate exploitation. As discussed earlier, the job market itself offers little freedom. Workers are bound by debt, insurance systems and precarious wages, yet religion tells them to endure and obey. This fusion of religion and capitalism has produced dire outcomes. The US remains one of the wealthiest nations on earth, yet it has among the highest levels of inequality, mass incarceration and healthcare exclusion in the developed world. Religion here acts as both justification and anaesthetic, blessing billionaires while numbing the poor. For anarchists, this shows why religion cannot be left unchallenged. In the US, it is not just a matter of faith, but a system of power that underpins hierarchy, exploitation and authoritarian politics.